All right, here we go. So if you guys can hear me, make sure you let me know both in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord and also in the live chat. And then we will get started. DLSS 4.0. Okay. Still not seeing anyone confirm the sound is good. I always do this because YouTube doesn't let you restart unless you entirely redo the live stream and the link, and so that's annoying. But all right, looks like I sound good to everybody. So cool. Well, welcome to the technically end of August loose ends. This is where every 3 to 5 weeks, or really 3 to 6 weeks, if we're being honest, I do a live stream so that you guys can ask me absolutely anything. I have nothing to hide, no questions I won't answer, if I have the time and I see them. So for those who don't know, though, patrons who support Moore's Law is Dead can submit reader mail before the live stream. And so I'll be working through those in addition to leaking some new details about DLSS 4.0, really the direction of DLSS. But if a super chat pops up there, I'm more likely to see it, and I will get through all of those as well in between the patron questions. So this one's probably going to be on the shorter side, probably like an hour 20 to an hour 30 minutes. So if you have a question, get it into the live chat as soon as possible. But otherwise, I will just get started here. And as I often do, I usually have a little leak at the beginning of a loose ends. And this one is about DLSS 4.0. And it's partially simply because Falto wrote in, just like you guys can if you support this channel on Patreon. And he asked, what do you think NVIDIA will do with DLSS 4.0? Are there any mini leaks or things you can devolve about it early? And I saw this question and I went, yeah, let me see. And the answer is yes. There's actually some early details that I can confirm or really kind of give you an idea of what to expect when it comes to DLSS 4.0. Now, I reached out and what I got was this. I'm going to read it directly from a contact at NVIDIA. What you are seeing with DLSS 3.5 is a good indication of where things are going. Expect more and more focus from us to be on image quality, especially image quality with ray tracing enabled, that aims to not lose as much performance as possible when said ray tracing is enabled. In other words, while latency reductions are always a goal for us, and I even hear something like asynchronous time warp is something being considered by us and also by AMD, probably, by the way. Don't expect that to happen as soon as simply improving image quality with DLSS further and becoming an essential part of boosting performance when ray tracing is enabled. All right, so that's the quote, right? And the way I would just elaborate on it is really when it comes to DLSS 4.0, 3.5 is the first step there. And if you think about it, DLSS 3.5 aims to keep ray tracing image quality as high as it can be, especially because if we're being honest, you kind of have to turn on DLSS to get smooth frame rates when ray tracing is enabled. And in fact, you typically get an outsized performance increase with DLSS when ray tracing is enabled. In other words, if you don't have ray tracing turned on in a game and you turn on DLSS, you typically get like a 20%, 15 to 25% performance boost. But in a lot of games, if you turn on ray tracing, then turn on DLSS, you get more than that, like 35% sometimes. It depends on the game, depends on CPU overhead, of course, but typically you get an even bigger boost out of DLSS when ray tracing is enabled. NVIDIA has done entire talks on why that is actually. And so if you think about it, though, if DLSS has been making ray tracing look worse this whole time, it's a pretty big deal to make that not happen anymore. And moving forward with DLSS 4.0, I think they're going to more and more so not really look for latency reductions first, although I'm assuming they'll always try to have latency reductions, nor completely only focus on really injected frames. Although I do hear that they really are not DLSS 3.0 for them. Frame generation isn't a gimmick. They see that kind of as the future of keeping stable frames. It really is about maintaining this image quality lead, especially when you have ray tracing. And if they can make it so that when you have ray tracing turned on and you turn on DLSS, instead of getting like a 35% performance boost, you get a 40%, and the image quality is even better than without DLSS. Then that's what they're going to focus on. So I think this is interesting because I don't know. I kind of expected them to focus on making frame. And again, they're always going to try to do this. Everyone is always going to try to make their generated frames as low latency as possible. But instead of focusing on doing as many tricks as possible so you don't notice it, it seems like it's more about maintaining that image quality lead over AMD, which if you think about it, makes a lot of sense because Nvidia has quite an image quality lead over AMD right now when it comes to, well, it depends. In certain situations, it's actually very comparable, but certainly at lower resolutions, certainly soon with ray tracing turned on, DLSS has an image quality advantage that you can't ignore. So I just thought you guys might want to know that that is the direction with DLSS, maintaining image quality as an advantage versus FSR, but even doubly so when you have ray tracing turned on, so that if you were to turn on ray tracing with FSR, the image quality gap will get even bigger. So I just thought that was an interesting thing to leak to you guys. And let me see here. We have a tip question here from Non's Goofy Videos who asks, why not the same room setup? Because I live in a new house now, which I announced a while ago. I don't know if you've been watching the channel for the past month, but I'm in a new house, and right now you're not seeing too much change in the background because I'm still kind of coming to terms with where exactly I want the camera pointed most videos and exactly how I want to do what's in the background. And I actually think I have a really fun idea for that. But yeah, you're going to see things shift in the background more and more, and all of a sudden you're going to start seeing tons of detail and more features pop up behind me as well. So just an FYI there. Um, Unity says that the 5800 X30 is a damn good last gen investment. Uh, oh, Non's Goofy Video says, why is Dan not in the room? He'll be joining us very soon. I just wanted to get through some of these questions, and then I'm going to get to the questions that were addressed to me and Dan as well. So Dan will be joining us very soon, but I'm kind of getting to the more technical stuff first and also waiting for more people to join. Speaking of people joining, there are 400 people in the room, over 400. Please like the video. We should hopefully have as many likes as there are people watching this live. And also, while I wait for live questions to come in, let me get through the sponsor right now. As always, this live stream is sponsored by Micro Center. Micro Center is opening up yet another new store in Charlotte, North Carolina, the second new store in 8 years, bringing the total to 26 nationwide. By signing up and visiting the new Charlotte store, you can receive a 128 gigabyte flash drive for free. You do need to physically go to the Charlotte store to get this free flash drive, but you don't even need to be a new customer. If you're on vacation there, if you're driving through and you happen to go into the Charlotte store, show them this deal. They will give you a free flash drive just for coming by the new store. But if you are a new customer, remember that you can use a link in the description to get $25 off any CPU. Any, doesn't matter how cheap or expensive, any CPU at Micro Center you can get $25 off, including their exclusive 5600 X3D. And then you can also get another $25 off, and it stacks on top of it if you submit pictures of your build. So that's another $50 there. You usually get $50 off with a motherboard. They're giving away free RAM with a lot of Ryzen processors and some Intel processors right now as well. So get free RAM, get like $100 or $200 off total. Go to Micro Center if you're doing a new build, especially if you're getting a 7800 XT, 7700 XT, or the newly discounted RTX 4070. All right. And again, clicking on the links in the description helps the channel a lot. Please click on those links. Okay. Now let me get back to the questions. And because today's leak was about DLSS, I thought it would be good to answer all of the DLSS and FSR questions first. So let me put down a timestamp for some of these. Space Channel 5 writes in, thank you for the tip, and says, whispers on FSR 3 frame gen, Cyberpunk drops soon. Yeah, I mean, uh, you know, when it comes to when AMD announces new features, you're just gonna have to see when they actually come out. I mean, to be fair, I haven't been paying that much attention to this. I mean, I own an RTX 4090, so FSR3 isn't at the top of my priorities. When Dan joins us, he might have more to say because he has a 7900 XTX. But when it comes to the frame gen itself, what I would say is I don't think there's probably going to be a latency advantage there, which is so interesting. That was something me and Dan and me and Dan thought about or expected a lot in Broken Silicons, which was that if AMD was really to go for something, it'd be to put as many fake frames as you can in there with as low latency as possible. It seems that what FSR3's advantage might actually be is it might have comparable image quality with less glitches. That's kind of what it seems like to me. Like they won't necessarily have a latency advantage. They may even have slightly worse latency, but the image quality will be even better, which is interesting because that's the opposite of what I would have expected out of a new FSR feature versus DLSS. But for now, that's really all I have to say to that. And Yeti also writes in and says, have any of your developer contacts mentioned being excited about FSR3? Do developers like FSR, or are they more partial to DLSS for the improved image quality? I actually love this question. Let me write down that too. Because when it comes to what developers like, honestly, it's very different from how it was a few years ago. Honestly, a few years ago, most developers thought DLSS was annoying. No, like until early 2021, most developers just saw DLSS implementation as some decision corporate made above them with a deal with Nvidia, and then the black box is programmed into the game and sometimes caused glitches. It caused glitches sometimes. But obviously, after Ampere came out with DLSS 2.0, and especially 2.1 and 2 and 2.3 and so on and so forth, DLSS really has come into its own where it often looks better than native. So at this point, developers like DLSS and they see it as something cool. On the other hand, they usually bring up FSR more often. That's what's so interesting to me is when you talk about these image upscaling techs, a lot of reviewers, commentators mention DLSS first, but developers tend to mention FSR first. And it's because it works on Xbox, it works on PlayStation, it works on Steam Deck, and it even works on that mountain of RX 580s and GTX 1060s that are still out there. So if you speak to most developers, they mention FSR because they're using it on the PlayStation and the Xbox and the Steam Deck. And without it, I mean, they wouldn't care as much because half of their sales, if not more, are on console anyways. And frankly, most of the PC install base can't use DLSS. AMD can't use DLSS. Pascal can't use DLSS. Even part of Turing, the GTX 1600 series, cannot use DLSS. That's most gamers on PC still. So developers tend to bring up FSR more because it gives them a baseline tech that they can apply to anything. But then if they can add DLSS if they have time to, they obviously like it because they think the game looks even better. So they like DLSS a lot. They think it's a cool feature, but it's hard to say they like it more, but they see FSR is more omnipresent for their job because it's always used in every platform. That's the best way I would sum it up. Woody Chang writes in and he asks, does AMD have an equivalent technology to DLSS 3.5 coming? Given their relative ray tracing weakness to NVIDIA, you'd figure DLSS 3.5 equivalent would be as beneficial, if not more so, to AMD. Yeah, that's a funny thing, too. If you think about what I just leaked about the direction of DLSS 4.0, NVIDIA is really just doubling down on what they already went on. NVIDIA typically has better ray tracing performance. Not really always. You have to compare which card you're talking about, but they typically have better ray tracing performance, especially at the very top end. And their image quality is a bit better. So they're just focusing on making sure future iterations of DLSS, when you turn on ray tracing, you have even more of an image quality advantage, an even bigger performance boost than AMD gets. That's really something AMD should be working on now. If AMD is working on this now, Woody Chang, to answer your question, of course they are. Of course. AMD is always working on equivalents to what NVIDIA has. It's just, when is it coming out? Like when an FSR 3.5 comes out, or whatever they call it, they'll probably call it 4.0. Will NVIDIA already be on 5.0? I don't know. So any question you have, is AMD working on an equivalent to NVIDIA? The answer is almost always going to be yes. Will it come out 1 or 2 years after NVIDIA has that thing out and NVIDIA's already on to the next thing, though? That's the greater concern. All right. Dr. Foreman writes in, and he asks, in my opinion, this tired old narrative regarding ray tracing being the future of gaming is outmoded. Radeon with the RX 7800 XT is proving, at least to me, that at $500, excellent raster with decent ray tracing and a good software suite is the future. Nvidia fanboys in the tech press and the tech press always push the RT narrative and it's great software. But to me, most gamers ray tracing in the mid range isn't very good, no matter what card you're talking about. And so I don't know. I think in the mid range, upscalers are on a fairly priced GPU is really what matters. I mean, I think that's what most people think too. I think that's why the 7800 XT is selling well. I think that's why Nvidia felt the need to drop the price on the 4070. They clearly saw a need to. But yeah, I don't have really much else to add to that. I think I'm in the middle on the ray tracing debate, which I have a 4090, so maybe that makes me biased, but I think it's both not something you can ignore anymore, but it's just not also it's also very like a third place to raster performance though. Raster is still king. I think raster is honestly going to be king for the next 5 years. I do not think in 2 years we're all going to only be worrying about ray tracing. There'll be the occasional fully path traced game, but even those are going to be using the stream processors, the CUDA cores, the things that you would be using for raster anyways for all types of graphical effects. They're just not going to go all ray tracing and drop everything else for anytime soon. So the hardware is just not there. It's not going to be there for a while. But at the same time, you know, I was able to, where is it? The 3050s back there somewhere. I was able to play Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition with an RTX 3050 at 4K medium with balanced DLSS on at about 60 frames a second. It's not 120, but it was in 4K with almost 4K image quality at medium settings on a 3050. So to say ray tracing is never a factor anywhere, I don't agree. I think it is a factor. I think it's a bigger factor in the top end where you're more likely to want all of the eye candy, to be fair. But I still think it's something that AMD really does. It would behoove them to tackle soon. And actually, this is where I'll do a shameless plug of the last die shrink that I did with Carbon Cry, where we talk about NVIDIA's ray tracing advantage. And you just have to think he proposed this argument that I think was a very good one, which is AMD is not afraid to be half a gen to a gen behind NVIDIA in ray tracing performance if it means that they can use 20-30% smaller dies and save money so they can undercut NVIDIA in price. That's basically AMD's plan. It was AMD's plan with RDNA 1, RDNA 2, and clearly RDNA 3. Say what you will about RDNA 3, but I mean, the 7900 XTX is a 100 millimeter squared less amount of silicon than the 4090, and almost half of it's 6 nanometer. So they managed to make something 80 to 85% is good before you factor in ray tracing for a significantly lower price. So yeah, I mean, I think that that's just been their plan with RDNA 2 and RDNA 3. Although RDNA 3's ray tracing performance did disappoint me, to be honest. And I think when it comes to actually fundamentally catching up, they're going to actually have to budget some silicon for ray tracing. And I think they're probably going to with RDNA 4, certainly by RDNA 5. But the funny thing is, it's almost I've been thinking about this. It's almost going to have to come from the consoles because Sony is going to want the smallest die that they can mass manufacture that can spit out. Shall we call it pseudo 4K 60 is what the PS5 does? Pseudo. It's not usually 4K. It's usually like 16 to 1800p dynamic res. Frame rate drops to 50 sometimes. Like we'll call that pseudo 4K 60. Like that's what's important to getting to the public and then charging $400 for. I don't think it's until Sony's like, hey, make it so we can do ray tracing in a $500-600 box that I think AMD will take it super seriously. But the PlayStation 5 Pro seemingly is coming out. PlayStation 6 can't be more than like 4 years away. So I think that is gonna come with RDNA 4 or 5. So, which on that note, let me make sure I don't have any tipped questions here that I'm missing. Remember to get those in early because this will probably only go for another hour. But I do now have some RDNA 4 reader mail submitted by patrons ahead of time. And I think I would like to get to those since I was already just talking about RDNA 4. So Falto writes in again and he says, when will the next generation of GPUs start? I remember you mentioning, let me release date. I remember you mentioning that they might launch later than usual. Yeah, unfortunately, Falto, I don't really have any updates to add about RDNA 4 nor Blackwell's release date. Um, The only thing I would reiterate, only things I would reiterate is I was told pretty confidently by people at Nvidia that if they want a new generation late next year, they'll have one. It's up to Nvidia though, if they really think it's worth it. So I think there's a good chance they might think it's not, depending on how this AI bubble's going. Um, when it comes to RDNA 4, uh, I think I think that's a decision AMD is going to make. What it's September in like 2 months. Um, to my memory, I think I've said this publicly. What I've had suggested to me a bit ago is RDNA 4 isn't completely done being defined in all of its configurations that will come out. So like, until they're 100% sure and until they, how they wanna do it, and until they're 100% sure, or at least 90% right, sure, how the performance will be based on their final simulations they do and where they see the market going, I don't see them even being sure themselves, right? Because if you're AMD, it's been a pretty rough 2023, especially when it comes to graphics card sales. But it seems like sales are picking up. I already called the bottom of the GPU market. Was it like 2 months ago? Perfect time, perfectly timed. The market has bottomed. Prices have gone up a little bit on the cheapest stuff. The cheapest stuff. Some other stuff like Nvidia stuff, I think still needs some price cuts to be fully competitive. Um, you know, but if you're AMD, you probably don't want to make a call if you want to rush out RDNA 4 until you see if sales keep picking up. And so I don't really expect anybody to make that call probably until like late October or something. If they see sales starting to catch up with last year and they're like, okay, well, we think we will be able to sell off the rest of our RDNA 3 and, by the way, RDNA 2 stock by the middle of next year, then I think AMD goes, well, as long as RDNA 4 is turning out well, let's try to get that out as soon as possible. But if sales don't keep picking up, if it looks like clearly a worse year than last year, if they're not confident next year will be better, and if RDNA 4 looks good but not great, I think they might go, we'll see. Maybe end of next year. It's not a priority. But that's all I can really say. And I don't think you should expect either generation in the first half of next year by any stretch of the imagination. So that's really what it seems like right now. Donald Kerner writes in and asks, which month do you estimate we'll hear more about performance and power targets for Navi 43 and 44? Do you think the dies could get a CU increase, or do you think they'll likely remain at 64 and 32 compute units, respectively, for Navi 43 and 44? Well, I mean, let me think. I mean, when do I think we'll hear more? I'm trying to think back. I'm trying to, because it depends on the generation, right? I mean, we knew a lot about Lovelace early. Ampere was somewhat mysterious though. And then on the other hand, I think we knew a decent amount about RDNA 2 early. At least knew about the performance. The specs really weren't completely confirmed on that one until a few months before release. And then RDNA 3, we pretty much knew the specs of RDNA 3 pretty much. There were still some surprises like mid 2022, so half a year before release. But so I don't know. I mean, I think I think there's a good chance I'll know a lot more before the end of the year. If not, Angstronomics probably will. And then Kepler, on Twitter probably will as well, to plug him. And I mean, we're probably going to know a lot more by early next year, especially considering if this PS5 Pro comes out, I hear it uses a lot from the RDNA 4. So, like, we'll definitely know a lot more about that then. Uh, Now, the question, Donald Kerner also asked, do you think the dies could get a CU count increase, or do you think they'll remain at 64 and 32? Well, like I said, I don't feel like the generation's fully defined yet. And there is still time for some slight tweaks to specs here and there. This is something I've asked people about at Nvidia and AMD recently, is like, when are things locked in? And it's like, well, the overall architecture is locked in probably a year and a half before release or something, which is where we're at about now with RDNA 4. The overall architecture is pretty much locked in. But then there are slight changes you can make if you are fast about it about a year before release. So they could go, well, we have two designs. Like there was, for example, 8106, which was used in the 4060 Ti. Nvidia had two designs, a 192-bit one and 128-bit. They went with 128-bit. They regret it. They underestimated how much RAM we would need, you know. But so I'd say there's still a little room for that. But if I'm being honest, Donald, I think the real question you want to ask is, are they going to increase CU counts? Because 64 doesn't sound like a lot. And I would say, we don't really know enough about the per CU performance or the architecture overall to really complain about anything. You know, when RDNA 2 rumors were coming out, there were people that saw a 256-bit bus and said, well, it can't compete with the 3080. They were wrong. And then with the 7900, what became the XTX, although it was obviously originally called the XT, before AMD's marketing department tried to play 3D chess with gamers and how they named their generation, unfortunately. You know, I think, there were a lot of interpretations of the specs that led to very different performance than expected. Like, RDNA 3 has less infinity cache in its current form than RDNA 2 did. And yet, as far as we can tell, it has more than enough bandwidth. So the infinity cache is way better than expected, but the compute units seem to be underperforming. So before you complain about only having 64 compute units in Navi 43, if that's what it ends up getting, consider this. For the most part, RDNA 3 at stock is around 2.5, 2.6 gigahertz, sometimes up to 2.8, 2.7 in APUs. Like, it was always intended to hit 3 gigahertz. You can even see Phoenix's specs were downgraded in clock speed right before release. AMD intended to clock RDNA 3 faster. They just kind of had a runaway power consumption problem. And if you look up Tech PowerUp's overclocking results of RDNA 3 products, these things can fly to 3, 3.1, 3.2 gigahertz and gain a tremendous amount of performance if you have the power budget. So who's to say RDNA 4 can't just run, it's like a fixed RDNA 3 with better ray tracing that can run at 3.2 gigahertz. Well, then think about that. That's like 10, 20% faster clocks than what we're getting out of RDNA 3. So 64 compute units is already performing, fairly close to a 7900 XTX at that point. And then consider GDDR7, right? So even more bandwidth with a smaller bus. You're already close to Navi 31 performance, and that's a fixed architecture, with GDDR7. That's before we even factor in this is going to use like the latest 4 nanometer node, or at least, if not 3 nanometer. So, before all of this is to say, before we say hopefully they'll increase the bus width or increase the CU count, let's remember we don't know enough about the per compute unit performance to know if that's even necessary. Like, if it's a 200 to 300 millimeter square die, maybe 350 millimeter square die that has same or better bandwidth than the 7900 XTX over a 256 bus because it has GDDR7, improved infinity cache, 3.2 gigahertz clocks, and a 20% IPC increase. That sounds better than the 7900 XTX right there without more compute units. And they could sell that for a reasonable price. I think that's good enough. So that's my answer. Before we talk about any increases in CU count or anything, we need to know more about the fundamental, more information about the architecture itself. I see that I have a tipped question here. Let me see. Let me get to Francisco's question before I pivot a little more into CPU talk. So let me put down a timestamp here. What are we? I wrote down the viewer count accidentally for some silly reason. Dev surprises. Okay, let's see. So Francisco C writes in, thank you for the tip, and asks, love the interviews you've had with game developers throughout the year. Yeah, for those who don't know, I had someone from Infinity Ward, someone from NetEase who used to work at Obsidian for Xbox Studios. Actually, the Infinity Ward person used to work for Sony Santa Monica as well, and an Unreal Engine 5 developer. I had on Brian Heemskirk, who's an indie lead artist. There's someone else too, I believe, that I'm forgetting. But yeah, there's been a whole handful of game developers this year. So make sure you to go listen to those. The last one was the former Obsidian Xbox dev who now works for NetEase. But the question, what's been the most surprising aspect you've learned from requirements now? What's the most surprising thing I've learned? It's funny. A couple of years ago, one of my favorite things that I learned about game development is just like how more RAM really does help. It just means we can have more variations, is a major thing. It's not just about making the development easier. That's a major part of it. It's like the reason the Switch version of The Witcher 3 has like one flower or two in the flower fields, whereas on PC you have like a dozen different colors, is because they don't have the RAM to show more than one flower. Or the reason on PC you see all of these different trees, and then on the Switch it's like the same tree copy and pasted 100 times because they didn't have enough RAM for more trees. So that's my favorite thing in the past. My favorite thing now, or the most surprising thing now. Oh, I don't know, just kind of like learning about what can go wrong, why it goes wrong, and like the reasons a dev makes a fundamental decision. Like, why is Bethesda still using this ancient engine with Starfield? And it's because it is still really easy to drop, drag, and place and make things quickly in the engine. And although they did some random generation for Starfield, a lot of it's just manually put together, and it's a huge world. And I mean, I never saw everything there is to see in Fallout 4, and I think I put like 400 hours into that game. They had hundreds of people going into each house and placing little things. Like I remember one time I discovered a teddy bear sitting on a toilet holding a newspaper, and I thought it was funny. Right? Someone put that there. They put the teddy bear there, they put the newspaper there, and they knew you might not even notice it. And that's why they use that, for better or worse. I would argue they might want to use a new engine now. Or like learning, like why, the Call of Duty devs like at Infinity Ward use the same engine they use. And it's just they have such a huge budget. They've really nailed the aiming and how they can keep latency low once you load a big map, although loading takes a while with their engine. And because of that, they don't want to use a different engine, and all that type of stuff. Is that there's always a reason they did something the way they did it, including why they might have DLSS in Battlefield 2042 and never add FSR. It might be because they already think dynamic res works well on the consoles. They think AMD cards can use dynamic resolution well, and they don't want to have to do a whole Q&A process with 100 different things. It's not as easy as flipping a switch because they will want to do Q&A to add FSR to Battlefield. It's the same thing with DLSS to Starfield, which that game barely works on all cards, really. If we're being honest, like I see people talk about Nvidia performance in Starfield, and it's like, I mean, 7900 XTX for the image quality it has, it should probably be getting more better frame rates as well, people. For being honest, I think. And like it doesn't like there's some glitches there. I think in Bethesda was happy they even got the game out on time. And after that, as usual, they're going to be focusing on actually making it work better for months or really the year following release, because that's what Bethesda just does. So I guess that's my answer, Francisco. Hopefully that put me on the spot a little bit there. Hopefully that answers you. Let me see what other questions we have. Let me see. Let me get through these two questions before I scroll back up to W. I see it, but I want to get through some more AMD questions first. So Brandon Waite writes in and asks, when will we see AMD MCM beat Nvidia Mono? And why didn't EVGA make AMD GPUs against Nvidia the reason they left the market? These are actually two fairly fun questions that I actually think I have the answer to. Let me write down a timestamp for these. Why didn't EVGA make AMD? Which I actually have a lot to say about that one. When AMD beat NVIDIA. Well, let's do that one first. So when are we going to see AMD beat NVIDIA again? Or at least I think we could all agree, when are we going to see them tie NVIDIA again, like they did with RDNA 2 performance? I mean, the fact of the matter is, and this is something I've explained multiple times on the channel years ago, and I think I'll just say it again, like everyone said AMD, let's even go a step farther back. Everyone acted like RDNA 1 couldn't compete with Turing. And then RDNA 1 comes out with a 250 millimeter square die that is competing with a 745 millimeter squared Turing die. Yes, one of them's on 12 nanometer, but you usually don't cut your die size in half because of not everything shrinks perfectly going from like 12 to 7 nanometer. So even if you were to cut I'm sorry, that's a 445 millimeter square die. A 545. I'm thinking of the 2080 Ti. I meant to think of the 2080. Sorry, 545 millimeter square die. So even if you cut the 545 millimeter square die in half that the 2080 use, you're still bigger than RDNA 1's 5700 XT. Even if you factor in ray tracing, it was impressive. If AMD wanted to have made a bigger RDNA 1, they could have. And it probably would have been at least performance competitive in raster with the 2080 Ti. And then AMD made the RDNA 2, competed with the 3090. And with the 7900 XTX, they have a smaller die than the 4090. They still haven't stacked cache on it, like has already been leaked that they can do. I don't think they would beat Lovelace because Nvidia can still launch a 4090 Ti that's 500 watts. So Nvidia would probably win, but AMD could get a lot closer than you'd think this gen still, if they really wanted to. It's just a matter of choice, Brandon. And AMD seems to be choosing next gen to not try to beat Nvidia on the top end by making something far smaller than Blackwell and cheaper. And that's probably, I think, because number one, they don't think the market wants expensive GPUs next year. Number two, that would compete, Navi 4C, which I leaked, would compete in capacity with uh, MI 400, the packaging capacity, which is a whole separate thing. So that's an issue. And then number three, NVIDIA is pretty far ahead with DLSS. I think AMD knows they probably want to have it's closer to feature parity in upscaling before they go for the high end. Because who's going to pay the same price for an expensive AMD graphics card as NVIDIA if NVIDIA has DLSS trouncing FSR? So when is AMD going to beat NVIDIA with an MCM design? I mean, when they think it's worth the money, and I don't think they will until RDNA 5. That's just what it comes down to. And Naughty DJ Aftershock also writes in, by the way, and asks, was Navi 4C supposed to be on 3 nanometers? I'm seeing since RDNA 5 and 5C is most likely on 3. Well, I don't know if you're referencing something. The RDNA 5 is probably on 3 nanometer simply by virtue of the fact that it's when it's coming out. So, but that hasn't been confirmed, to be clear. Was Navi 4C supposed to be on 3 nanometer? I know there was an initial design that used 3 nanometer, but then that was about a year and a half ago. And then like a year ago, I was alerted they're considering 4 nanometer. And then now it's canceled. So I think just both were considered. And obviously 5 will use 3 nanometer, or it should, like obviously. And then I just want to round back here though. So Brandon Waite's other question: when will we see? Why didn't EVGA make AMD GPUs against Nvidia? Really, look, let's just get to it here. There's two reasons that Nvidia or that EVGA decided to stop working with Nvidia. Number one, they just felt screwed over, and this has been talked to death and multiple leaks and details that I've put out there. Gamers Nexus, of course, went a bazillion videos about it. It really comes down to respect. I know a few people who know the head of EVGA, and what I'll say now is he's fundamentally insulted by how if you remember, there was the EVGA KO series, right? Like the 2060, if I remember correctly, that was below MSRP from EVGA. And then every now and then EVGA would make these KO graphics cards that were cheaper than everyone else's. And in fact, if you go back and look during the 2021 and 2022 shortages, oftentimes EVGA was the only one doing that 2-fan. I reviewed the 3060 from EVGA that had just 2 fans. That was sometimes actually sold for EVGA and usually below $400, so that it was actually a reasonably priced 3060. That's because they were accepting lower margins, and Nvidia always pushed EVGA based on what I am told, because they're like, well, you're our number one seller. If you want to be our number one seller, you want to get all of the allocation. You got to play ball at EVGA. We need you to sell some of these cards below cost so people don't say it's a fake MSRP. That's what it comes. And then over time, Nvidia kind of just tighten the screws more and more, reduce their margin more and more, and they just thought they're going to put them out of business. And EVGA said, hey, if you expect us to accept these margins with Lovelace, well, you have these insane 4090 coolers we have to compete with from the Founders Edition. We don't want to support it. And I think Nvidia thought EVGA was bluffing. In reality, EVGA wasn't bluffing. EVGA said, "You've shoved so much Ampere oversupply down our throats." EVGA had the most of it, that we could sell off Ampere stock for 2 years straight and still not have room for Lovelace. You got to help us do some kind of rebate, write off, help us do something with this stock, or we're not going to support Lovelace. And I think Nvidia obviously thought they were bluffing. They're like, "You have to support Lovelace. You're fucking EVGA." And they weren't bluffing. And the fact that EVGA couldn't get assistance from Nvidia, remember the guy in charge of EVGA, I don't remember if it's privately owned or not, but like he's really in charge. And he said, "This is about respect and I'm done. I'm done working with these people. I don't care if this goes out of business." You also have to remember that the head of EVGA is old. There could be health issues involved there, I've heard. And this could just be about he's too, kind of like, I'm too old for this shit. Like, I don't really care if this company goes under. I'm going to retire soon anyways, and I'm not going to let Nvidia do this to us. So that's unfortunately what it comes down to, And so then why didn't they make AMD graphics cards? He's too old for this shit. He was tired of it, and he always had a loyalty to Nvidia. I've heard people describe the head of EVGA saying like he'd always bring up loyalty. Like, I know AMD wants us to make stuff, but it's about loyalty. And he feels betrayed by Nvidia because he really values loyalty so much, and they weren't loyal to him, but he still feels loyalty. He's not going to be the one who betrayed them by working with AMD. And that's why. That's the truth. That is why. I don't think I've ever opened up about this before. I should probably put a timestamp to this because I actually think these are details no one else has divulged. It all comes down to Nvidia abused their special relationship with EVGA, making them get razor thin margins compared to the other AIBs. And they always did shenanigans here and there that EVGA was tired of dealing with. EVGA said it's got to stop. We're not doing this anymore. Nvidia thought they were bluffing. They weren't. EVGA felt personally betrayed and said, "I'm too old for this shit." And because it's about loyalty, though, they still don't want to work with AMD, and I just don't think he has the energy anymore to care. So that's really what it was. Just so you guys know that's why. That's kind of a behind the scenes there it's about time I just let it go. I think it's safe for me to talk about it now. All right. Woof. Let me get to this question here from W and pivot to some more CPU talk stuff. W writes in and says, "When should we expect Pi-like PCs with AMD APUs?" I assume you mean Raspberry Pi. Don't we already have them? There's been card-sized APU PCs before. I believe a Jaguar. Yeah, I believe there was like a Jaguar NUC thing that's the size of a deck of cards back in the day. But you can see some of these APU systems getting smaller and smaller. Of course, I'm friends with Minis Forum and GeekCom as well, so I expect to be able to review half of these when they keep coming out. I think I might have another one on the way soon. So I think you'll just see those keep getting smaller, and I'd argue we're kind of already to that situation now. And it's anyone's guess when it's small enough that you can call it a Raspberry Pi. But I'd argue there's already kind of been those things in the past. And frankly, all right, so let's say it's not the size of a Raspberry Pi. Like, let's say this marker is the size of a Raspberry Pi. Let me think here. What else do I have next to me? I have a box. Like, if this is a Raspberry Pi, does it really functionally make a difference if it's this big? Does it for most people? Like, this still almost fits in a pocket. I don't think it really does. I know it's not the same as putting a computer on a keychain, but I think they're going to keep getting smaller, and they're kind of already almost occupying that niche, except it's just much more powerful and higher performance and therefore more expensive. So if it's going to be more expensive, you might as well give it better cooling too, which you're not going to get in a Raspberry Pi sized system. Let me write this down as a timestamp since we have more APU questions here. Infinite Inspiration Zero writes in and says, "With AMD Halo APUs and CAM memory coming and becoming more prevalent in 2025, what do you think the laptop market will be like once these are mainstream?" So it's like Strix Halo's out. We keep seeing battery lives get better and better. I remember when AMD Rembrandt came out, that was impressive performance you could get in mixed usage without playing games or something. Yeah, I think what we're going to see is more and more laptops, instead of being this thick, and truly having all day battery life. I mean, you've already seen Apple has pioneered this in the past few years, where you can legitimately have a 24-hour battery life. I just think that's going to become more commonplace with Meteor Lake and Strix and so on and so forth. Just thinner and snappier, and frankly, because they're going to cut out D GPUs and half of laptops soon, probably more reliable. I mean, half of the driver issues are because you got to put your frickin' Nvidia graphics card routed through the Intel outputs, which sucks. By the way, it sucks. I mean, I can't do as many custom resolutions and use half of the NVIDIA control panel features because that's go through the frickin' Intel integrated graphics. Once you remove that, I think it's all going to get a lot better, even on the Intel ones. Spencer Walker sends a tip. Thank you. Let's see. Preston Morton writes in. Dr. Forbin says, hello, how is the new house? It's great. It's been a lot of work, though. It's definitely a work in progress. But what's nice about having this new house is it's not like another house I've had in the past where it's like, well, am I going to move in a few years? Am I moving 5 years? When I lived in Peoria, when I lived in the other house in Nashville a few months ago, it's like, do I really want to add on, fix this, get a new dishwasher, do this thing? Because am I really going to live here forever? And now it's like, maybe not forever, but I think you'll be here for a while. And so if there's a quality of life improvement to be made, I'm not afraid to do it. So I'd say that's the nicest thing. But let me get back to CPU questions here, actually. Quick Jumper writes in and says, hi, Tom. And let me see. I'm just going to answer this even though Dan's not here yet. Hi, Tom. What do you think about the new cache DRAM that Intel is developing together with Samsung? Do you think it will be better or comparable to what AMD is doing with TSMC? No, not really. I don't have really anything to say about it. I think the LPDDR5X that Intel is going to put on Meteor Lake looks cool, takes up significantly less space, has latency and bandwidth benefits, but it's not fundamentally any different than stuff other people can already do. And I'd be surprised if it was at the minimum more cost effective than what TSMC is working on. So I don't say that is a bad thing. That's just like, do you see this as like something that we couldn't have foreseen or that someone else can't do? No, I don't. When it comes to chiplets and stacking memory, uh, AMD is pretty much king with TSMC at this point. We'll have to see how Adamantine, which was exclusively leaked by this channel, turns out. But until I see that prove itself, I don't really have any other take than that. Intel has got cool stacked memory stuff coming. I don't really see it as an advantage over stuff AMD's working on, though, really. Zabeto3 writes in, greetings. Does AMD have a competitor for ultra low-end laptops like Twin Lake, whether currently or in the future? Is it a market worth getting into? Yeah, it's called Mendocino. Mendocino is their Twin Lake and Alder Lake N competitor. Right now, Alder Lake N has 8 Gracemont cores. Mendocino has 8 Zen 2 threads. That's the competitor. AMD's is probably a little cheaper, if I had to guess, because 10 nanometer I hear is not cheap, even though it's being used by Intel itself. And I think we'll see a Mendocino successor or a little Strix that comes out in a year, and that will be competitive with Twin Lake. But they already really have a competitor in Mendocino, and I think I'd rather have 8 Zen 2 threads than 8 Gracemont threads, probably. I don't know. I haven't seen any good benchmarks of that really demonstrate it's that great. The Gracemont 8 cores. They really are meant to kind of be stacked behind big cores. I'd much rather have one big core and 4 little cores than 8 little cores, I think. In other words, So, all right, let me see here. I've got a few questions. Let me see. Intel Twin Lake. No, A17. I expect we'll talk about the Apple A17 a lot more in the next Broken Silicon, but I have a couple, so I want to get to them here. Chris Rich writes in, and he says, it's curious how times have changed. I like this question. Apple's new A17 Pro was just announced on 3 nanometer, and the CPU is about 10% faster than their previous design, which is also what they managed with their previous 2 designs. Apple seems to have stagnated, and I'm seeing lots of comparisons to Intel 2010s. I don't have any good explanations for why, but maybe they don't feel the need to improve performance. Yeah, or Apple doesn't have the talent that Intel and AMD does for CPUs. Crazy thought. Apple's CPU engineers, maybe they're not as capable as AMD and Intel's anymore. They kind of got a head start with a boatload of funding and using ARM. Remember, when Apple was starting to make their own silicon, they were competing with a stagnant Intel. That's not the case anymore. And AMD now has more money to fund stuff as well. And Zen 1 was just building. Like, it wasn't until like Zen 2 and 3 that AMD was like fully realizing the Zen concept. So I don't think that they're getting stagnant. I think that AMD and Intel are just making more interesting architectures all of a sudden. Having said that, I don't think that's the whole story here. I would also argue that Apple's motivations with their APUs are quite different than AMD and Intel's. You have to remember that Apple's making a SoC that is directly made next to their people programming to the metal for it. And if you're programming to the metal for this architecture, you can probably get a lot more out of it that requires less bloat than otherwise. By that, I mean, if you know exactly how to tell the app to work with your silicon, you don't always need as much cache. You don't always need all of this bloat that kind of is making your CPU extra general purpose, right? Like AMD and Intel know that their CPUs are going to be used in Linux, Windows, Apple. Intel used to use them as Apple. AMD is going to use them in consoles, and a lot of apps aren't going to be optimized for your CPU. If you're Apple and you've got things to the metal, I don't know. You might want to be more conservative with how you build, and you might not need more CPU performance all the time. If you look at their neural engine performance increases, they're increasing way faster than their CPU. That might be because Apple, when they program to the metal, when they already know that they have this ecosystem they built where developers are already using their AI engines all the time, maybe they think there's more money worth investing in that than worrying about the CPU as much. But I think that's what it really is. I think it's two things. I think Apple's priorities are just different, and they have good reasons to have different priorities than AMD and Intel. But at the same time, I don't know. Maybe AMD and Intel have just hit a few home runs, and Apple had a really strong architecture out of the gate, and they may need to hire more people. They may need to get Jim Keller back in there or something. Sylvanos writes in and says Apple just released its new iPhone 15 Pro with the new A17 Pro SoC. It's just 10% better at CPU related performance than its predecessor. Does that tell us potentially bad things about the 3 nanometer process at TSMC, or is Apple just happier with smaller SoCs and a bit better performance? Well, I think the answer is yes to the last question, but you have to remember that Apple isn't using the 3 nanometer node variants that Zen 5C, Arrow Lake, Blackwell, RDNA 4 or 5 will be. Apple is using one of the earlier 3 nanometers to launch first because they have the money to do so. I covered this extensively with Daniel Nenny the last time he was on Broken Silicon, founder of semiwiki.com, literally wrote the book on foundries. And he pointed out that 3 nanometer from TSMC is like a year behind, but that's it. It's a year behind, which means the initial products that use it will either be lower performance than expected when they come out, or they'll be the same performance and come out later. But after that, everything's going great. So Apple's the one using the initial node that had problems. What is it? N3, is it B or E? N3X. There's all of these 3 nanometer variants coming out that are really the fixed and upgraded above expectations versions of the nodes. And so that's what AMD, Intel, and Nvidia are going to be using. I wouldn't read that much into the performance of Apple stuff from the 3 nanometer node. They're paying through the nose to get something that's better than 4 nanometer for their purposes early. That's why. And the other nodes are going to be a lot better. The other 3 nanometer nodes, I should say. All righty here. All right, let me put Tell Dan to come in. I guess I have to send 2 messages. And then I also have to text a friend this, or they won't be able to find me later today. Okay, and just one more reminder as well that remember to click on those links in the description and check out Micro Center. They're the sponsor of this video, and that helps a lot. Spencer Walker 21 writes in and asks, "Do you think Valve should stay with AMD for Steam Deck 2? Does Nvidia have anything coming down the line that can compete with newer RDNA 3 and 4 chips?" No. And yeah, they'll stay with AMD for sure. Talani yeah. I hope I said that name correctly. I bet I didn't. Tips me from New Zealand, it looks like. It says, "How do you get your jaw to be that way? Just living my life the way I do." Talanani. I said your first name wrong for sure the first time. Let me make sure Dan saw that. All right, let me call Dan and make sure he saw my message. Here we go. The Dananing is happening. Dan. Here we go. Well, if he doesn't come in, I will tell someone else to get Dan. Well, I'm sure he will walk in any minute now. I just sent a bunch of people to bother him at the house. All right, let me get to this question though, because this was one I didn't necessarily intend to answer. If Turing used 7 nanometer, and let me switch this to here. It's an Nvidia question. And again, I think we've got about 25, 30 more minutes here. So if you have any questions for me and Dan, co-host of Broken Silicon, who will be in here in a second, make sure you ask them now. All right. Oh, I hear him. All right, let's see how goofy this looks when you're sitting next to me.
Can everybody hear me?
Well, probably not, but
We'll
do this when you talk. But I'm going to keep it over here and then move this way because I didn't want to hook up the other mic. So forgive me, everybody. Oh, they said they could hear you anyways.
Oh, good.
All right. So Jeffrey Reyes writes in and says, "I love your thoughts on a hypothetical question. What if Nvidia went with TSMC 7 nanometer with the Turing 220 series as opposed to staying on the same 16/12 nanometer node as Pascal?" Well, you mean the 12 nanometer node. Pascal was 16. Could they have done it? The 3080 was better than the 2080 Ti, but it required more power draw to get there. Well, yeah, it required more power draw, but let me see. What else? I'm actually curious. 3080 transistor count. 3080 had 28.3 billion transistors. Turing, well, Titan RTX transistor count. It had 18.6. That's funny too, right? If I divide 28.3 divided by 18.6, yeah, that's why I say more and more as time goes on, and it's stating the obvious to some people, but if you want to know the performance of the next generation, what's the die size and node? I'll tell you,
Look how many transistors there are.
Yeah, that many more transistors typically is roughly what it's going to be. I guess there's also factoring in bandwidth, but what if Turing was on 7 nanometer? It's funny. I put some thought into this question. I mean, is it the same die size? Because Turing was 745 millimeter, 54 millimeters squared. I mean, so what are we talking about? A 754 millimeter squared 7 nanometer die? That's a different card. It would be 50% more SMs or something. Or are we just talking shrinking it? Well, if you're shrinking it, it would be probably 10% stronger and use 20% less energy. I think people forget that, like, people always say, but Turing used 12 nanometer. Right. But it used 12 nanometer so that it could have 3 times the die size of RDNA 1.
Yeah. I mean, the only implication I can think of that could have made a bigger thing is if they would have had like a stronger relationship going forward with TSMC. But I mean, I'm guessing they can buy TSMC if it's if it's there, so that doesn't matter to them that much.
I think TSMC is just happy charging Nvidia 50% more than AMD or something. And especially when Nvidia is willing to buy 754 millimeter square dies. But all right, I bet they're actually very happy with Nvidia during this AI boom. Probably going to rethink some of those. Who's their best friends at this point? All right, let me get to another question here from Deep Gulags. And this is one I was hoping you'd look up. Deep Glugs writes in and says, in a recent Broken Silicon, much was made about Intel reporting anonymous telemetry data via their driver package with Alchemist. I may be wrong, but don't AMD and Nvidia also do this? And Nvidia does it without providing a way to opt out. Well, so number one, my AMD lets you opt out, right?
Yeah, AMD pretty much asks you if you want to opt out. So
yeah,
which I think should be the industry standard. Nvidia does collect telemetry data, though.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it also sucks that Nvidia does it. It also sucks that Nvidia makes you log into their superior drivers.
Which AMD really likes talking about in their press conferences, that you don't have to log into them.
And that's a thing that I see. It was kind of a divisive set of comments I noticed in the last video I put out, which was like, AMD people like, thank you for acknowledging that AMD has their own software features. And then Nvidia people were like, can you believe this guy says AMD has good software features? And it's like,
I mean, I'm able to get like a 15% overclock in driver with the 7900 XTX, or not overclock, but I get like 10 to 15% better performance with that overclock. With
you don't need a download
tool.
You don't need to download MSI Afterburner. You don't need to worry about if the next drivers will break Afterburner compatibility. Do I like DLSS more than most of AMD's features combined? Yeah, but I mean, like, it's not like it's a non-factor, though. That's why, for me, when I did that video talking about, like, for AMD to take market share, I think they need a 30% advantage. That's what I think the market needs to see. And half of that reason is NVIDIA's brand power. I was talking to someone at NVIDIA about this the other day. Someone who was telling me actually about the 4070 price drops and was like, isn't that going to change things? And I said, maybe, the 7800 XT still comes with Starfield. And while it might change what other people say, my recommendation is not a 30% difference. If AMD is overall 20% better, 10%, 15%, I'd still recommend it because, well, DLSS is a major advantage. You've also got Radeon Chill, which for some systems is really, really useful. You've got built-in overclocking. The driver menus are better. It got DisplayPort, 2.1. There's a lot of features here that AMD has. You don't need to log in and give up your data to NVIDIA. I like DLSS more than those things combined, I guess, especially because I'm so used to using Afterburner. But I don't know. I mean, if AMD is the same performance, same amount of RAM, and like 15% cheaper, easy choice for me because, well, I mean, that's kind of the DLSS difference. And then I get all this other stuff.
I think at that point, in my opinion, it's kind of dealer's choice. Like, look at the games you're getting. Are they going to offer more DLSS or not? And if there's not many games that you play that have DLSS, go with the AMD option. If it is, go. If you play a ton of games with DLSS, go with NVIDIA. 30%, I think it's absurd that people still like.
But NVIDIA has better brand power, so
yeah,
that's why. It's not saying it's fair.
No, I know. I'm just saying I think from an objective buying standpoint, once they're within a close proximity, if AMD has a slight raster benefit at the same price, it's more or less like what programs are you going to be using more? What's better for you for AMD or Nvidia? Where the market currently sits, I think it's crazy bias towards Nvidia with pricing, the prices people will be willing to pay.
By the way, I'm seeing this person in the live chat. Mojo Jojo says all that stuff makes zero difference for gaming.
Oh.
Really literally boosting my performance with overclocking in the driver.
Lowering energy usage.
Lowers energy usage. It literally gives you 10-20% more performance. No, that does make a difference for gaming because it gave you more performance. Duh.
Yeah.
You know, and Radeon Chill actually has latency advantages. Power consumption goes down. All of this, we're always obsessed with power consumption when Nvidia wins, not during Ampere for some reason, when they're blowing up their 3090s. But when what is it? New World is melting 3090s. But you know, if you care about power consumption, Radeon Chill really does work. You know, again, there's a reason Nvidia commands a price premium usually in the market, but there are features AMD has that Nvidia doesn't that are features.
Yeah, it's just in my opinion, complete crap to say.
Someone says Radeon Chill also helps with screen tearing. Oh yeah, that's what I used for my girlfriend's PC. It's like gone, screen tearing gone.
Yeah, I mean, I just think if you're going to talk about software features from one company and then just say boo-hoo, poo-poo on every other software feature from every other company, just admit that you want to buy an Nvidia card.
Yeah, just admit and you're wearing green glasses. We know you are.
Like, I'm not discounting Nvidia's software suite over AMD's. I would say Nvidia's probably is better because
and they have their own features from like encoding and
and
you know their voice, RTX voice and stuff. So I'm not,
and it's not like you can't overclock an Nvidia card. It's just having that feature in driver simplifies things a lot. And I would say at the same price, same performance, same amount of RAM. Obviously, right now I would get an Nvidia card because it has those gaming features. And
it usually would win in DLSS if it's same raster.
Yeah, exactly. So I would
win a ray tracing. I guess a DLSS.
I would still recommend Nvidia if that was the case, but that's simply not where we're at. Pretty much anywhere in the market. Anymore. Yeah. So if the 4070 like dropped to $400 or something, I would recommend the 4070 over the 7800 XT.
Hive Mind says your argument is you have to download MSI Afterburner. No, it's not. I listed a ton of features, and you're just straw manning this argument, dude. But let's move on because we can see who has green glasses in the comments already. PC Dog, right? Oh, perfect timing. PC Dog writes in and says, this one is for Dan. After having the 7900 XTX for a little bit now, have any of your initial impressions changed? Do you think it will benefit from FSR3? Well, I mean, it only can, but what do you think about that?
I mean, obviously it will benefit from FSR3. I'm still a bit of a skeptic when it comes to frame generation, and we'll see once I have frame generation that I can use. Maybe I'll be an evangelist for it because I love it. But I still think you're adding latency because you can't not add latency with frame generation. And I want to see, does adding a bit of latency and doubling my frame rates with probably not very high quality frames, does that really boost my experience that much? And we'll see. I'm personally more excited about like anti-lag plus, and I'm hoping that reaches more parity with what like Nvidia Reflex has. Other than that, like as the 7900 XTX stands, I think if you don't want to spend $1,600 on a graphics card and you want to do 4K gaming at like 100 plus frames per second, the 7900 XTX is there. And I think it's one of the best options on the market for enthusiast tier gaming. But, you know, if you don't want to make any compromises, I wouldn't say don't get a 4090. Just know you're spending like double the amount of money that you would get for a 7900 XTX. But once you're at the top tier of performance, that's your option.
Yeah, and it's interesting here. I'm trying to confirm if they have Mountain Blade Bannerlord supports DLSS 3 yet, because that was one of the games where I was waiting to use it. I mean, I could almost just boot it up now and see, but I'm not going to in case it affects the stream.
I'm assuming it would.
It doesn't seem clear to me, but the whole frame generation thing. I have a 4090, but until like I have several games that I play every day that support it, I don't really consider it a real feature, and I'm not gonna. And it already seems goofy to me. So it's just funny to realize, like, I still don't feel like as a 40 as a person who's had a 4090 for almost a year, I still don't see it as a real feature.
Yeah, and we'll see how like the driver level support from AMD, how well that
Right.
works.
So I think you're also
Which,
skeptical AMD will be any better.
oh yeah, I have no I have no assumptions that AMD will implement FSR3 better than Nvidia implemented DLSS 3. I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before. AMD is always late to implementing their features because, and to an extent, it does feel like AMD is reacting on the fly to features that Nvidia announces. Like, oh, they have frame gen, we need to announce frame gen, and we'll figure out how to get it a year and a half later. Which,
Well, that was one of the questions I answered before you came in. Is someone said, "Does AMD have a answer coming to DLSS 3.5?" And I said, "They have an answer coming to literally everything NVIDIA is working on. The question is, will it be here in 2 freaking years?"
yeah, if DLSS 3.5 is as good as Nvidia says it is, which I'm not doubting that it is. Like, yeah, I'm sure AMD will come up with a feature to counter it, and it will come out Q3 next year.
Yeah. Compressed Earth Blocks writes in and says, with the 4060 Ti and 4070 getting $50 price drops, do you think NVIDIA will be reevaluating where the rest of their lineup is positioned, or is this the bare minimum to fend off AMD from them? I mean, I think this shows that they were definitely going to consider supporting like the 4080 getting de facto, which it's so funny. We live in this world where AMD pretends the 7900 XTX is a $900 card, and
Yeah.
I mean 7900 XT is a $900 card, and Nvidia pretends no MSRPs have changed, even though all of them have different pricing now. But I guess that's just the world we live in, where companies don't want to admit they lowered pricing. Uh, I've seen
Okay.
1100, and that's Gigabyte. They're the ones playing ball with the other de facto price drop. And Zotac is as well. It wouldn't surprise me if Nvidia is making it easier for the 4080 to be $1,100 as well. I should ask about that. But if Nvidia really, it just depends how aggressive AMD is going to be this year, I think.
Yeah.
Like if AMD does official price drops and they say the XTX is now 900, the XT is 750, and then they drop hopefully the 7700 XT to 430 or 400, and hopefully the 7600, frankly, to like 220 or to 250 probably. Like if they just adjust their lineup down a bit, I feel like Nvidia kind of has to respond. If they don't, though, it is definitely because they're not making a lot of cards.
I mean, the thing I'm not sure about is how much they're just allowing the market to dictate the prices because uh, I think like the 7900 XTX at about 900, 850 ideally is good. The 7900 XT should probably be like 750 to 800.
Yeah.
And the 4070 Ti should probably be a bit cheaper than that, around the same price. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look,
But
in the hypothetical world where AMD's lineup becomes 900, 750, 500, 400, 250 or something, and
yeah,
then there's presumably a $200 7500 XT, which I think is coming. Like I think for Nvidia to do okay, they need some price drops. But if they wanted to like dominate sales like they have in the past, I don't know. I mean, if I'm being honest, I think then the 4080 already has always been hilariously overpriced relative to the XT. And even people I talk to at Nvidia say they know the 4080 is overpriced. Like
yeah.
they were huffing shortage paint when they put the $1,200 MSRP on there. They know it. Um, nothing else can explain why, for some reason, the 4070 is half the price of the 4080. When has
Yeah.
that ever happened in a lineup before? They know they made a mistake. But then it's like, I don't know what price it should be because they'd probably go down to 1,000, but I would argue it should be the same price as the 7900 XTX personally. One of them has slightly better raster, worse ray tracing, but 50% more RAM. But yeah, I mean, I think at a minimum, they'd have to go from where they are now down to like 1,000 for the 4080. like 700 for the 4070 Ti, 550 to 500 for the 4070, 400 for the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte personally, 350 for the 4060 Ti, and like below like 250 for the 4060. I just don't see them doing that. I could see the 4080 getting a price drop though. I really could.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for me to say. I don't really know how. I think the 7900 XTX and 4080 should be close to the same price.
I can see why
maybe
Nvidia would charge a little more.
Maybe a little more. I think
it is more efficient. It does do ray tracing better. It does have DLSS. It does also have a third less freaking RAM. But
yeah, I think the 4070 and 7800 XT should be the same price. I think the 4060 Ti 8 gigabyte should be like at 350. If it actually goes to 350, the 4060 Ti is almost okay to me. If the 77 and the 7700 XT should probably be like $400. If everything drifted down, I mean, I guess everything I think should drift down like $50, and I think that's mostly fair, except for the 7800 XT, which I guess I'm just kind of saying I think the 7800 XT should be the new price performance anchor in the market. But
the 7800 XT, yeah. I mean, let me go to Tech Power Up here and see the relative performance difference. To
the what?
Anything. I mean, but like the XT itself, I think is worth pointing out because people ask me
7900 XT, you mean?
Yeah, like a lot of people ask like which one should I get? And well, you know, the 7900 XT is only about 30% better at most. And so if you think about it, then it kind of has to be almost $700 to be even remotely close to the same price performance.
Yeah.
You know, so the 7800 XT is definitely the king of that right now. And I can't help but think that some adjustments need to happen to all the rest of both of these lineups then. Yeah. But yeah, unless I think once you get to 750, the 7900 XT at least gives you a level of performance that's fun. Dan can see who's calling me. Anyways, though, let me continue this before we completely lose everybody. Okay. All right. Well, this person's on the same train of thought that we're on, so let me continue it. Daniel Martin writes in, is there any reason the 4080 needs to cost more than the 7900 XTX? Do we think the 4080 costs more to produce than the 7900 XTX? I think it costs slightly more, depending on the cooler you're talking about. Let's put it this way. Nvidia uses the 4N node, and it's 380 millimeters squared.
Mm-hmm.
AMD uses 300 millimeters squared of 5 nanometer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some packaging costs there, but most people tell me that's really only another $20 or something, maybe 50. And meanwhile, Nvidia's silicon cost, and remember, AMD gets a better deal on silicon than Nvidia.
Yeah.
So I think there's a good chance this 4080 costs at least the same to make.
Yeah.
And that Founders cooler is absurd. I mean, that thing alone, I've been told, is like $200.
That's a. I mean, I'll give it to Nvidia. Their Founders coolers are really nice looking.
They're very cool.
They are definitely over-engineered though. And then from my perspective, as far as like, why would the 4080 and 7900 XTX just not based on like materials? The reason they should, the market would dictate that I think they should cost the same as they get about the same raster. Why the 4080 should be a little more is they get about the same rasterization performance. 4080 is a little weaker. And then the market seems to value DLSS and ray tracing more than having 50% more RAM because I don't think most
at this level it's more important than it is in the low end. 16 gigabytes is usually enough.
I don't think people really see 16 gigabytes as being 50% worse or
no,
a 30% a third worse than having 24 gigs of RAM. And that's probably true. I think most people will be off of their 4080s by the time 16 gigabytes is a real problem, but we'll see.
Well, it's funny that 30% rule that dictates if something sells well. The 7900 XTX has definitely outsold the 4080. Literally just outsold it. Not just like relative to the market share. It's outsold it. And it's like, well, why does that happen? Well, let's see. The 4080 costs 20% more. The 7900 XTX is slightly better at raster. and then we can round up to 30% because it has a lot more RAM.
Yeah.
You know, and so if the 7900 XTX became 900, I think if the 4080 was 1,000, it would pick up in sales a bit, probably. You know,
Yeah.
so I mean, I think that 30% rule for like not just selling well, but beating Nvidia in sales dictates that, you know, the question was like, why does it have to? It doesn't have to, it just does. It
Yeah.
probably costs the same to make, if not a little more to make, but at the same time, a large part of that's the coolers they're using on the 4080. They could be using cheaper coolers, and they could make it the same price or a little cheaper to make, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, especially because of the power consumption. If they would have just made it a 250-watt card, especially 2-slot designs, there's no reason the 4080, it would have lost like 3% performance. It could have been easily an $800, $900 card. It does cost more to make than the 3080. It does, and it's been widely covered that thing was sold at cost at $700 or something. So it probably would have been a $900 card, but okay, that's still not 1,200.
Yeah, the 4080 does have like 6 pounds of metal on it. So
yeah, it's a freaking unit.
I don't even know if that's hyperbolic. I don't think it is.
I don't think it's that. Well, I don't know. Do they say the weight of it on here? I know they say it's somewhere.
Let me see if
No, it's not on Tech Power Up.
Okay.
All right, let me continue. Lars Hansen writes in, thank you for the tip. Can we, at this point, which is September 16th, well, 15th where we are, almost be sure we'll get a PS5 Pro next fall? The way you phrased it, I think sounds correct. There seems to be smoke to this fire. And the fact that you see Kepler talking about it is a good sign, because he's not one of the bullshit leakers. You know, and I've heard about it too, but I guess I still can't say 100%, but I'm operating under the assumption we will, if that gives you any confidence. Let me see here. Oh boy. I guess I'll answer this one before we get to the next one. Kenny writes in, is this the worst time to be a consumer? No.
Or maybe he's just asking worst time to. I don't know. Maybe he's asking when was the worst time to be a consumer.
When was the worst time to be
2020.
2021.
Yeah.
2021 was the worst. 2018 wasn't great either. I mean, there was a mining shortage there. Turing was milking the market as bad as Lovelace. As bad, too. I mean, again, you know, people... Where did Nvidia get the idea to charge $800 for a 104 die? I don't know. The fucking 2080 is a 104 die that was charged. They charged $800 for the Founders Edition. Like, I don't know where Nvidia got this idea.
It's almost like they've been slowly increasing the prices over the course of 6 years.
Yeah. But no, this isn't the worst time to be a consumer at all. Our CPUs are god tier compared to 5 years ago. I mean, it's seriously like, go look up like Xeons from 2018 and compare that to what we have now with like 5.7 gigahertz 16 cores and 24 core i9s on desktop. And then you see, like, I guess I'll plug links in the description, Micro Center again. Like, I'm just curious. Let's just see what their deals are now. Micro Center R9 7900X is usually the best one because no one wants the 12 core. But yeah, so right now at Micro Center, you can get what is it? That's the base clock's 4.7. God, that's a high base clock. But what's the boost clock? You dingus. Like on Micro Center, advertise the boost clock. That's a bigger number. Okay. Yeah. So it's a 5.6 gigahertz 12 core that's being sold for $410. When I built my PC in not the one I have now, but a while ago in 2016, I built a PC and I was deciding between a quad core Skylake for $300 and a $450 6-core Broadwell E that ran at like 3-point-something gigahertz.
Well, yeah, or I mean, on the market right now, there's their last gen, but there's 8 cores now on the market for like a little over $200. I think you can get a 6-core i5 for $150. SSDs cost like $50 now for a terabyte.
The SSDs are free.
RAM costs $80 for 32 gigs.
Or to finish what I was saying before too, again, guys, I was deciding between a $300 quad core or a $450 6-core. Now in Micro Center, you can get a $409 apparently 12 core that comes with 64 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah, now is not a bad time to build a PC. It's insane.
Yeah, the floor has risen for new GPUs, but
For sure.
the floor has also dropped out, it seems like, from a lot of other products. Like, and the problem is the hardware space is so overly focused about only talking about the top end thing that you ignore that you can get a perfectly well performing processor for $200 that's $250 that's has 8 cores or 6 cores, and that will do you just fine for pretty much everything. And yeah, or you can spend twice as much and get like a 7000 or 7800X 3D or a 7900X. Like,
I'm trying to think what biggest, because I want to also compare this to like how much the goalposts have moved for the performance we expect now out of our PCs. Biggest games 2018. Wasn't it like Red Dead Redemption 2, but not to PC? Or was that when it came to PC?
oh, I don't remember. I mean, it came to PC like 6 months after, so it probably came out in 2019.
Biggest PC games 2018. We got here. I'm sure there was a. Is it The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt came out 2018? No. Good job, Google. But I mean, like, let's just use Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead. Or like, I'm trying to think of like a good, or let's do Hitman 3.
I mean, the way I would put it is, I do feel like over the last 5 or 6 years, the standard for what's considered playable is now over 60 hertz, or honestly, a lot of websites act like anything below 100 hertz is bad at this point. And 4K has become more and more of the norm over the past 5 years.
But like, here, let's just pull up a 2080 Ti. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. So, all right, I wanted to put things in perspective here because I just feel like people aren't remembering. So, everyone's complaining about how bad Starfield's GPU performance is. If I go to TechSpot right now, I'll put a link in the description after we're done streaming. With a 4090, it says 70 frames per second in 4K. Now, that's medium quality, but I'm sure they did that to be fair because NVIDIA doesn't do very well. Okay, but let's do high. All right, so 4K high with Starfield, 61 frames. And then the 7900 XTX, which you can get for $900 now, is 59 frames. If we go back to 2018, 5 years ago, Monster Hunter World in 4K, 50 frames. The $800 2080 was getting 38 frames, and Monster Hunter World wasn't a bad optimized game, to my memory. Assassin's Creed Origins, 64 frames. Kingdom Come Deliverance, 54 frames. So as bad as Starfield's performance is, and it definitely is unoptimized, it is, we're still looking at, in the past, people would be like, well, you're getting 50 frames in 4K. Now, if the flagships get 50 frames in 4K, and the 7900 XTX is cheaper than the 2080 Ti, people are like, what the fuck's going on? Like, so to say now is a worse time to be a consumer is insane. Like, you must have just got into PC gaming. Now, people complain if you don't get a locked 60 with a flagship. The flagships cost just as much oftentimes back then. They got lower frame rates. Your CPU was a bucket of shit. Like, and now they give away free RAM and an SSD apparently with your build. So we got to keep things in perspective here. That's not to say you should be mindless drones and accept bad deals and let companies screw you over. It is to say, don't forget how things used to be. The 290X review, people were freaking out. You could run games at 30 frames.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would put it, like, I feel like in the past, I mean, helping friends build PCs 10 years ago, I could build a mid-range system for a little under $1,000 back then. And I think now I could build a pretty good mid-range system for probably $1,000 to $1,100. So it's like over the course of 10 years, a PC of roughly equal quality for the time, I think, has probably gone up by about $100 to $200. And that's kind of just inflation, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, depending on how you quantify it, that's less than inflation. But I know people hate talking about inflation because buying power still isn't that much better than it used to be.
And this is hilarious. I'm seeing people in the live chat right now say, how much did Titans used to cost? Sometimes 2,200. Fucking 2,500. The Titan RTX was 2,500. Titan Volta, $3,000. Titan Z. That's
Well,
10
yeah,
years ago. The Titan Z, $3,000. Yes, not every Titan was that expensive, but they often were. And a lot of the Titans were more cut down. I mean, it's no, like, and everyone keeps bringing up the 4090 in the live chat. You don't have to buy the 4090. You can buy the 7900 XTX. It's 80% as good for half the price. Meanwhile, in the past, there was nothing. There was just the 2080 Ti sometimes. I mean, and again, let's be clear. We're not saying now is the best time necessarily. We're not. We are saying there's been multiple times where it's worse. A lot worse.
Especially like a lot of people don't seem to care that much about 4K gaming. So if you don't care about 4K gaming, you can kind of just ignore the top cards on the market at any given time.
Someone says the Titan is not marketed as a gamer GPU. Then why the fuck did it say GeForce on it, genius? It said GeForce on the Titan.
Yeah.
It was a gaming card. No professional was like, hey, this thing that cost me tons of money to make, I'm going to skimp for worse drivers. They would buy the Quadro.
Yeah, the only one that was like in a weird space was the like Titan Volta, but that was an odd card.
I still can't get over this. You know, Adora TV did a good video about like the Titan shenanigans. Guys, Titan is a gaming card. It was gamers buying it, marketed to gamers on gaming websites. It said GeForce on it. There was a special edition of the Pascal Titan that had fucking Star Wars branding. What do you think? Star Wars branding's for professionals? I mean, what are we smoking here? The Titan was always a gaming card.
Yeah.
Always. The only thing I'd give some exception to is Titan Volta.
Yeah, the Titan Volta. I mean, they've been marketed to some extent over the history as prosumer things, but like it's mostly gaming.
I'm going to say it again. They had a Rebel Alliance,
I know,
Evil Empire branded Titan Pascal. That's for professionals, genius. God, the arguments people make with zero research. Sorry, I'm getting mad here. But all right, let me move on to a couple of the final reader mails. I think we're going to wrap this up very soon, people. So if you have any more tipped questions, put them in right now. Sarcastro writes in and says, Tom and Dan, how do you feel about Starfield now that it's released? The decade-long development cycle, and in particular VRAM usage being rather low. Is this a happy mistake which will boost sales with I don't think anyone's calling Starfield's performance a happy mistake, which will boost GPU sales, or this change with optimization updates rendering older renderers to 720p. I don't think anyone's looking at Starfield performance and going, this is how most games are going to pan out. My 8 GB card's safe. Nobody said every game's going to use more than 8 GB. To this day, there are some games that use less than 4 every now and then. But even the trend is clear.
And even Starfield, from what I've seen, can brush up to against 8 GB. So
Yeah.
the idea that oh look it's using 7,800 megabytes, my card is fine forever, is kind of insane.
Yeah. As for like what I think about the performance, I mean, it's a Bethesda Studios game. I always thought to myself, I'll get this during Christmas break when I have more spare time, and they've had a few months to actually fix the game. The only game I got at launch from them, I think, was Fallout 4, and that was like the one that actually kind of worked at launch.
Yeah, I'm surprised the fact that Starfield isn't performing super well has become this huge debacle, because that's just status quo for Bethesda games. The only thing I guess that's different this time around is Todd Howard seems very, very seems very confident that this game is performing how it should for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it is. Some Radeon cards aren't rendering stars.
Yeah,
that's intended.
Exactly what they wanted. You,
Howard. So I don't have much to say about it. Is this a trend? No, this is one game. This game doesn't perform like the other ones either. No. I need to get that package out. I almost forgot. Woody Chang writes in and says, how are all the animals getting along with each other? 2 dogs and a cat must mean chaos. Fine.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a bit rocky for like a day, but that now my dog and Tom's dog are best friends. So
you're right. I meant to open this up way earlier. It's better late than never, I suppose. Mail. All right, wait. Let me get it though, so we don't dox ourselves.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Turn it around. Or
We'll do it this way.
all right.
Yes. So we got a physical reader mail here. Someone, remember, there is a Moore's Law is Dead P.O. box, so you can.
If the arm will not.
If the arm will
slowly
behave.
lower.
Geez, there's a lot in here. So the first thing that was sent, and I actually left them downstairs, were sunglasses from the first horrible video I ever made.
I think it was a pretty good video, but
for those who want to know what I'm talking about, watch the Tom and Dan Christmas episode, Broken Silicon, from 2019. I show a clip of the worst video I've ever made that never got released because of how embarrassing it was.
Is that 2019 or 2020?
2019, I believe. Oh my God. He got us a glass that says Moore's Law is dead.
Very nice.
Very topical Borat reference.
I mean, Borat's always topical, right, Tom?
I mean, it's gone through so many cycles of irony that I kind of think it is.
It's post-ironic.
It's post-ironic
At this point.
A diploma for you, Dan.
Thank you.
For finishing grad school.
I don't think that's my official diploma, but...
No. Oh, my God. And he made us a bottle of wine called The More You Spend, the More You Cabernet, the More You Cab Sav. I get it. And I'll let me put this up to the camera here. This is, oh my God, this is such a thoughtful gift.
2017, Tom?
Yes, this 2018.
2018, Tom.
Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about when I say the worst video ever made. One that I did as a pilot, never released. This is how I was dressed in the video.
And it looks really cool.
You're seeing that correctly. Shirt. I have a Batman shirt. I'm drinking wine with sunglasses on inside because at the time I was like, you know, you need a gimmick to be successful on YouTube. You couldn't possibly just make good content and then people will support you.
No, you do need to have a gimmick.
And I decided I did not need a gimmick. There's two of these. I might have to whip that out tonight. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time to do that now because I don't have a bottle opener.
The company is Tech Douche Sellers.
Oh my God, Tech Douche Sellers. Well, I think that's everything. That's a very and I forgot. I do want to give a shout out here. I believe it's. Let me check the email too. Whose name it was, because I should mention him by name. Scott, yes, Scott Ruff Schneider sent us stuff before. Thank you. You've been a long-term patron. Thank you for sending us a bottle of wine to celebrate the new house from Tech Douche Sellers. This is when I was a Tech Douche, and I'm sure some people in the comments will still call me that, but I think I'm not anymore. But yes, thank you so much for that. That'll be fun. We'll actually probably whip those out tonight. That'll be fun. I need to open this though. I need to see what the heck this diploma is he supposedly got you.
Oh, Lordy.
And it's just, oh, it's porn. Oh, my God. It kind of is. Oh, my God. He got him a waifu.
I've needed a waifu, I guess. So.
Well, and so then there's this as well for Dan, apparently, which is really the opposite. Dan usually likes to make fun of anime and stuff like this, but I think that makes it even funnier that this is what he got, Dan.
We will see.
We will see
where I can hang this in my house in the future without getting embarrassed.
Yes.
Will that be anywhere? Who knows?
It's just like your most prized possession, like you have a shrine to it, and they're like, "What's up with Dan's?"
I do have a weird painting that you got me of Jason Mantzoukas that I.
That's true. You should put this next to it. Well, we don't want to distract from Jason Mantzoukas, of course. Daniel Martin writes in and asks, stupid request. Can you ask Micro Center why they don't have a store within 1,000 miles of Seattle? Oh my God, that's even worse than Nashville.
That's a surprise.
That's a huge tech hub too. I have no clue. I mean, there's not.
Wasn't there Fry's Electronics until recently though, or am I wrong?
Maybe, but I still think it's weird.
Yeah.
Like, why is there not a Micro Center in Nashville where like Oracle's located or Seattle? It's insane. I don't know. There should be a Micro Center. I'll email Micro Center today. Let me write that down. Email Micro Center.
I'm sure there's probably somebody internally there already fighting for that, but
Yes. There's got to be. I somewhat get Nashville because I believe there's one in Cincinnati. There's a Micro Center. They just opened in Indianapolis. There's two in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia. So
Okay.
they've kind of got Nashville surrounded, and so they're pulling from all of those areas. Seattle, 1,000 miles of it's bizarre to me though,
yeah,
because I mean it's not in Portland either, right? Oregon,
I would.
1,000.
Yeah. There's
Well,
no way
maybe he's
they're
using
1,000 miles
hyperbole.
apart, but
Now that I'm thinking about it, 1,000 miles is far.
the only reason I can think is there used to be a Fry Electronic in what is this? Renton, Washington.
Oh no, he's maybe not
Don't
kidding.
let's not have your
There might not be one within a freaking 1,000 miles because this is 500. Yeah, I think it is 1,000. That's crazy to me. Yeah, that's wow. I don't know. That's nuts to me. You'd think they'd have some reason for that, but I can't think of a good one. That's crazy. So we shouldn't confirm. I mean, at least sometimes we're in Chicago or something. That's nuts.
Yeah.
All right, let me see here. Let me look at the Discord, make sure we didn't miss anything. All right, I think that's it there. Make sure I didn't miss any reader mails. Oh, there was one from W. Let's make sure we get to it. Should AMD get rid of the Threadripper lineup and just keep making chipsets so you can have a Threadripper MOBO that has an Epic CPU in it? No, I think they should keep Threadripper. I think that has a lot of brand power. I think they should just actually release a new one.
Yeah.
I don't. There's a difference between Epic and Threadripper. Epic, you're looking at some of them can get to high clock speeds, but generally speaking, you're looking at 3 to 4 gigahertz clocks.
Yeah.
And a mountain of cores. Threadripper, sometimes the same core count, but it uses
overlapping core counts.
But it's clocked, 50% faster. So, but it uses a lot more energy. I think there's definitely they should do that. In fact, even if they just released 72 cores, 64 cores again with Zen 4, I think that'd be enough.
Yeah, I mean, I just think Threadripper is probably going to be more sparing. Like they clearly don't think it's as valuable as their other two brands. So,
yeah. But anyways, I think that's going to do it. We've actually got to get going. I actually went longer than I thought I would. Remember, everybody, hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed. Apparently, 2/3 of viewers over the past few months aren't subscribed. That really does help the channel a lot. Click. I know it's insane. Don't be a tech douche like the guy on that bottle of wine there. Well, the guy on this bottle of wine was off camera. Don't be this person. Don't be me from 4 years ago. Check that you're subscribed, ring the bell button, and share the video. Click the links in the description. And again, thank you everybody for the support, no matter what. And have a good weekend, everybody.
yeah.
If I just forgot how to end it.